Hello, welcome to the last Sunday of Advent and the last Sunday of our Advent series on embodiment, where today we're going to talk about embodying magic. 2 days before we celebrate Christmas, for those of us who celebrate Christmas, a couple days after the winter solstice, where we acknowledge and experience the longest night, the darkest night, and the shortest day, in anticipation of light breaking forth and the days beginning to lengthen as we journey through the season of winter. Magic came to me as the theme for this final Sunday of Advent, and instead of the typical theme of peace, as I sat with the story of the Magi. And I know in the Christian tradition the story of the Magi isn't read until Epiphany, until the beginning of January, and I felt drawn to this particular story as we looked at, in the build-up to the birth of Jesus and the events surrounding the birth of Jesus, who were the major players, who were the most significant characters at play. And it was constantly, as you look at John's Gospel, as you look at Luke's Gospel, you look at Mark's Gospel, which doesn't even account for the nativity, but in showing Jesus at his baptism, all of these events that surround the beginning of Jesus' ministry, the birth of Jesus, the coming of the divine word into the world, they all are situated with these very particular characters, these particular kind of people who would be found on the outskirts of society, who Howard Thurman would call the disinherited, who we would understand as the marginalized and the oppressed, the outcasts of society. Many of us identifying closely with the stories of these individuals, the women, the poor, the oppressed, the orphan, the widow, the eunuch, the Magi. Oratio, a Persian Sufi master, a poet, and a writer, wrote, "God loves himself in you." In reading this, I can't help but feel like this harkens back in a way to Matthew's own words, that Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us, incarnate in an infant child, and that these said to be wise men or kings, as tradition has told us, but these Magi, better understood as astrologers, magicians, alchemists, came from the east, most likely from Persia, to come and experience and worship and bear gifts to the one who is called God with us. Matthew writes, "In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, wise men came to the east, to Jerusalem, asking, 'Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage.' When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.' Then Herod secretly called for the wise men, the Magi, the magicians, the astrologers, the alchemists, and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, 'Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage.' When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. And opening their treasure chest, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him.' Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Out of Egypt I have called my son. These particular characters, one historian, in referring to Magi, which was they were part of a Persian priestly class, in referring to them, this historian called them absurdities. Theologian and New Testament scholar Warren Carter says that they were thought to be of the lowest class of people, low lives, associated with the low life of drinking and brothels and with superstition and astrology and other fantastic and unpredictable happenings. It's a strange group of people whose numbers we don't really know, and tradition says there were 3 because there were 3 gifts, and that's about as much as we can tell about how many. But what we can tell from what history tells us, what scholars tell us, is that this group of people is most definitely not the 3 distinguished kings from around the world who came before Jesus to present Jesus with gifts. No, these were an outcast group of people who were revered for what seemed to be their capacity to access power, their capacity to engage with the divine and to access the supernatural, to have this insight and knowledge that seemed otherworldly. The Magi were deeply political in that they, through dreams, through magic, through reading the stars in the sky, could talk about the rise and fall of empires, the overthrow of kings, and the installation of new kingdoms. And here, in this moment, these Magi are experiencing that very thing for which they were revered and feared for. A bright star rises. Historians and astronomers debate whether this was a comet, whether this was the explosion of a supernova, whether this was the conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn. There's so many options for what could have caused such a bright star to rise. But regardless, these experts in the movement of planets and stars, a practice that to this day is regarded by many as superstitious, and treated with ridicule, they were able through this practice to determine the location and the time of the birth of the one who's called Messiah, the one that is God with us, the one that Araki, the poet, testifies is God in us, the incarnate one, who comes to us through the person of Mary, who comes to us through this lineage of women, from Tamar to Rahab to Ruth to Bathsheba, all the way to Mary, of women who in the face of great evil, in the face of oppression, in the face of darkness and chaos, conjured in their beings new life, conjured in their beings the magic required to overcome evil, to overcome empire, to overcome the very oppression that would rip the very life breath out of them. They sought to redeem that which Adam, that which Abraham, that which David, and all the other men in the lineage of Jesus sought to destroy. These women cultivated life and the possibility of liberation. And the Magi knew that Jesus would be the manifestation of the magic that these women had labored for generations. A labor of hope, a labor of love, a labor of longing and lament, knowing that God had promised that a Messiah would come. And these women did not give up until the moment in which Jesus had finally arrived, and there they celebrated, as we saw with Mary and Elizabeth, women who knew that out of the darkness of their womb, out of the labor and the cracking of hips and the longing for justice, they would bring forth hope. They would bring forth life. They would bring forth justice. This is the magic of which we speak. It is a deep ancestral magic. It is a deep ritual magic that says that in the hardness of life, in the messiness of life, in the absurdity of our marginalized bodies, we have the capacity to create something new. We have the capacity to bring forth life. It is, as the major prophet Beyonce says, the spinning of gold out of this hard life, the conjuring of beauty out of the things left behind, is the finding of healing where it did not live. It is the discovering of the antidote in our own kitchens. It is the breaking of the curse with our own two hands. It is the passing along of the instructions of this magic in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of the arbitrary, in the midst of the excruciating. It is passing on the magic in our instructions and the ways in which we have survived and overcome. It is passing this on from generation to generation, that we will see magic manifest and healing happen and liberation come through. Magic cannot be defined in such simple terms as XYZ, it is this, and thus put it in a dictionary. Magic is the serendipity of the divine in the arbitrary moments of life. It is those simple acts that often come out of a place of desperation and hope. It is the longing for justice and the cries of Bathsheba. It is in the yes of Mary to a God who says, I know that this is not going to be easy, but will you? And her response in her being, the spell that she casts with her words and with her body is to say, let it be unto me according to your will. And so the divine is embodied in her, and she embodies magic. That which breaks curses, that which sets people free. She, Mary, is the alchemist and the astrologer and the magician. She is all of these things to whom the Magi come to revere. They themselves, astrologers and magicians and alchemists, reading the stars, reading the skies. Most likely, many of them were likely eunuchs or queer folk, potentially even women, although we always depict them as men, as always we pick them as royalty. These were queer folk, perhaps, women perhaps, who were longing also to no longer be observed and walk through life as absurdities, but to be found dignified in their humanity. And so they practice their own magic out of a place of hope. Magic is the very power that comes out of the hope that we declare with our mouths and with our bodies in a world that is desperately seeking to destroy all that is good. The Magi conjured up this magic and found Mary conjuring up her own in a lineage of women who had been fighting for freedom, and found the ways in which that freedom could be brought was to spin gold out of the hardness of life, to conjure beauty out of the things left behind. These were the forgotten people, and in their forgottenness, in their queerness, in their absurdity, they found power to overcome, power to move through, power to tear down mountains. This is what Matthew writes about. For 28 chapters, Matthew gives us a grimoire of some of the most powerful magic, ancestral magic, in the first page, walking through the genealogy of Jesus and showing these are the curses that these men have brought upon us. And here are the ways in which these women who fit oddly into this story, these are the women who have been breaking these curses. Here is Herod, an emperor, a king, a despot, someone who has been inflicting evil and injustice and pain, an entire nation, juxtaposed against a group of strange individuals from a far-off land who come bearing their own magic and their own skill to declare that empire would fall. The rest of Matthew is a tete-a-tete between the powers of this world and the magic of the oppressed, who would say, yes, there is a real power that seeks to destroy us, but there is a power in our bodies that we will use to overcome. And that is what the Magi bring. Not just gifts of frankincense, a powerful medicine, or gold revered by alchemists and bankers alike. Not just myrrh, a perfume that was deeply healing and also used for embalming and testifying of the day that Jesus would one day be buried and resurrected. Not just those gifts, but the very body of the Magi themselves. Their very bodies were the gift brought to Jesus. I saw earlier today this painting that I'm going to try to see if I can get onto the screen. This painting of a retelling of the story of the Magi, showing two saints bringing two queer men before the infant Jesus and the Virgin Mary. The infant Jesus with his arms wide open, and the two queer men being brought to Jesus as gifts, both showing signs of being ill, showing signs that they have AIDS. And yet, what the artist is communicating to us is that that body was a gift to Jesus. The queer body is a gift. The HIV positive body, the AIDS positive body, a gift to Jesus. Queerness, absurdity, is received by Jesus with open arms. That itself, from the eunuchs from the East, or the queer person today, is the greatest gift and the greatest magic that can be brought to Jesus. The alchemy that we create out of our rising in the morning and our going to bed at night, out of the rhythms of the full moon that glows outside my window right now, out of the darkness of the solstice which we have just experienced, and out of the anticipation of Christmas and the incarnation of the Messiah. In our queerness, we conjure hope, which is a deep, deep magic, a powerful magic. We call back to the ancestors and recall the magic that they conjured in their bodies to survive. The things that Tamar overcame, the things that Rahab overcame, the things that Ruth had to survive, the things that Hagar wrestled with and overcame in the wilderness. Magic as a means of survival. Things judged, things questioned by the establishment, but things acknowledged and testified by those in the margins as a means of liberation. The burning of incense. And the burning of incense and the mixing of herbs in rituals align with the rhythms of the moon, all radical attempts to conjure the divine that lives deep in our being, the God whom Oratio says loves himself in us, the God who is most present when he is present in us, the God who is most powerful when he is powerful in us, the God who makes himself known in the life of these Magi who journeyed across the desert and through the wilderness to come and worship that very God who had become incarnate. The God who made himself known in the body of a woman named Mary. The God who makes themselves known even now in the lives and in the bodies of queer folk seeking not only to survive, but to thrive and to flourish in a world who still demands that because of our queerness we ought to suffer, who expects that because of our queerness we ought to remain in the shadows, and instead of coming into the fullness of our beings and the fullness of our light. And so in the spirit of these women in Jesus' genealogy, in the spirit of the Magi, who conjured magic and read the stars and mapped the planets in their place to determine where the Messiah would come. In the spirit of everyone who has gone before us, conjuring magic out of this hard life, spinning gold and breaking curses and finding healing in the midst of it all. My prayer is that we would go forth, not just in peace, but in power this Christmas, free to practice our magic, bringing about not only our liberation, but the liberation of everyone who longs deeply in their being to one day be set free. Go in peace. Go in power. Amen.